I'm not entirely sure where this story fits, but I hope you'll read it and that the community enjoys it. My name is Reynaldo, and I'm from Mexico, specifically from the state of Michoacan. Although this story didn't happen in my home state, but rather on an oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico many years ago. I studied petrochemical engineering at university, and with hard work and a bit of luck, I got a job at an oil company whose name I won't mention. I was assigned to an oil platform shortly afterward, and for the next few months, that mountain of metal in the middle of the ocean would be my home. I was, of course, really excited. At the time, I was about 26 years old, and although I was inexperienced when it came to offshore drilling, I had all the necessary theoretical knowledge to do my job. Everyone on the drilling team was quite nice, but not exceptionally so. Many were there to work, not to make friends. But when you're with the same people for months, you inevitably open up. You chat, hang out together, and complain about the constant smell of oil that permeates the place. Like a family, but with less affection and more work meetings. Of the entire team, I was the only one who was on a platform for the first time. And they gave me some off-the-cuff advice on how to stay calm in the confinement and keep a clear head despite being in the middle of the ocean. But of all the advice they gave me, there was one in particular that caught my attention. They told me, at night, avoid chasing after strange sounds, knocks, scrapes, or whispers. Just don't. Our minds play tricks on us all at some point, and you'd better keep your feet on the ground. If the sound is important, it'll still be there in the morning, and you can check what's causing it. But at night, just let it be. Everyone on the drilling team seemed to completely agree with that last piece of advice, and for a while they told stories that I assumed were meant to scare me because I was the newbie. This was the case, at least, until Luigi, a very serious man who worked as an electrician, began to recount his own horror story. One night, while working outside the platform, on the level below the main deck, repairing a system that had been damaged by the salt air, he heard a loud bang that even shook the ground beneath him. He thought something had hit one of the platform's columns because the impact was so loud it even echoed through the metal structure. Or so he thought, because when he looked down into the dark, unfathomable sea surrounding the platform, he saw nothing. He ran out and found a colleague working in the kitchens. He hadn't heard anything or felt any bang. Luigi admitted that at that moment he doubted his partner's sanity, but then he met the kitchen assistant, and she didn't feel anything either. There, Luigi doubted his own sanity. Had he gone mad? Perhaps confinement was as damaging as they said. He slowly returned to his work area, picked up his tools, and continued repairing the malfunctioning system as if they had been expecting him. Again, a loud bang reverberated through the area, but this time he felt it closer. He looked carefully to his left, and although the platform was well lit, he took his heavy flashlight and, with a lump in his throat, cautiously advanced toward the source of the echo of that resounding, repeated blow. After walking about 50 meters, he reached a staircase that descended to the service area at the base of the platform. A chain blocked access to this completely dark area. Then he felt it again, a sharp knock from that fearsome darkness that blended with the blackness of the sea around him. Luigi's heart suddenly raced, knowing that something was there, banging hard on the railing, urging him to come down. Luigi held up his flashlight, staring at the staircase, his hand trembling like never before as he wondered if he really wanted to see what lurked in the shadows that night. Like any of us, Luigi didn't have the courage to turn on his flashlight, and one last tap on the steel was enough to break it. He ran out, grabbed all his tools, and didn't stop running until he found the operations manager. On the verge of tears, he explained that the system could wait a couple of hours, but that he couldn't go back to that place. And although the operator demanded an explanation of what was wrong, Luigi didn't give any details and simply said he couldn't be there. That boss no longer works for the company, and Luigi doesn't know if he knew anything or not, but at least he didn't bother him again until sunrise. Early the next morning, Luigi finished his work. The truth is, while it wasn't my dream job, it was the job I'd been preparing for years, and doing it filled me with satisfaction. However, the shifts were rotating, and when I had to work nights, I felt a bit nervous. I don't know if it was Luigi's story or the others, but when I came down from the main deck, and the closer I got to the service areas going down narrow stairs, the stranger I felt. However, I didn't tell anyone about it. I got the job of operations engineer, and as such, my role consisted of supervising and optimizing the drilling systems, as well as ensuring that the operation was running as smoothly as possible. This job meant that I had to constantly walk up and down the platform to find any problems that were slowing down or affecting the rate of crude oil extraction. My first nights and days on the job were pretty good. Despite this discomfort, I didn't openly show that Luigi's story impressed me. That's why, and because the feeling of dread I felt was the deepest I've ever experienced, I know that what I went through was real. One night in August, I was doing my duties around midnight. Another member of the drilling team was with me, helping me with the inspections. I'll call him Robert. He was a couple of years older than me and quite quiet. His company greatly helped me tolerate those terrifying moments in the lower areas of the platform. But right outside the stairs leading down from the main deck, he was called over the radio. The operations officer needed his help and told me I could wait for him, but I refused, assuring him I could continue alone. What a terrible mistake I made. I went down the stairs, trying to look brave, and slowly checked the pressure and the condition of key pipes and electrical systems. When, in the distance, mingling with the sound of the sea below and the machinery, I heard a sharp clang on metal. I don't consider myself a coward, but immediately every hair on my body stood on end, and my gaze fixed on a dark point in front of me, undecided whether to keep walking or not. Suddenly, I shook off my fear, and my more rational side reprimanded me for stopping at such a silly noise. I was on an oil platform. Of course, there would be strange sounds. That didn't mean anything. Emboldened by this thought, I started walking, checking the systems with the same tension. However, another clang, this time louder from the lower level, made my heart race and my legs tremble. I felt what Luigi must have felt at that moment because I knew I was the only one on that level of the platform and that there couldn't be absolutely anyone below me. I thought about waiting for Robert, but again, a part of me, no longer rational but reckless, convinced me that it was impossible. Completely ignoring the advice I'd been given not to investigate strange noises at night, I hurried down the corridor, removed the chain blocking access to the lower level, and slowly descended the stairs, clinging to the railing as I shone my powerful flashlight into the profound darkness of that platform level. I was 2 levels from the sea, and in that area, there were only pumps and heavy machinery making a lot of noise. However, that sound was in the background, and my ears only registered the sound of the waves, the echo of my boots, and the sharp, dry thud of some metallic object hitting the railings, the machinery, or the monumental columns of the platform. My flashlight illuminated several meters ahead, but even with it, I struggled to get my bearings, and the courage I'd mustered up as soon as I stepped off quickly vanished as I walked, feeling the cold breeze on my hands and face. Without a doubt, going down alone had been a bad idea, and every time that thud was repeated, my knees buckling. Each step became more difficult. Deep down, I had a feeling that something strange was happening, something I wasn't going to be able to face alone. I clung to the railing with my left hand and slowly, as if it were the only thing I could do at that point, I continued walking, getting closer to the noise. The pumps were still working, the waves were still crashing against the platform, and I could only hear the thud echoing. Then I turned a corner and knew that whatever was hitting the steel was there, a few feet in front of me. I walked in that direction, waving loudly, my voice cracking and my hands trembling, receiving only the metallic clang in response, until I finally reached the end of the walkway to see a metal bar hanging from a cable that must have come loose from one of the pieces of equipment. With every gust of wind, the safety railing swayed and rattled forcefully. Tears of relief sprang to my eyes, and for a split second, the world was a safe place again, free of mysteries. My life returned to normal, and I took a deep breath as I reverted to my usual skepticism. But that lasted only a second. Suddenly, a tremendous bang made me jump, and I was so startled that I fell backward. I dropped my flashlight for a moment, but when I retrieved it, I got up, holding it, and shone it toward the source of the bang, the nearest column on the platform. I only saw it for an instant, a millisecond, a dark shadow that vanished into the darkness as if becoming one with the wind. Needless to say, I ran from there immediately and didn't stop until I found Robert on the main deck. My distress and fear were obvious, and he immediately dropped everything to stop me and ask what was wrong. In a state of shock, I wasn't able to explain what had happened. In fact, I don't remember everything that happened that night perfectly, other than that I spent it in the sickbay. The next morning, I suffered a severe panic attack, but I was fine. The platform doctor asked if I'd been having trouble adjusting to the platform, if I'd seen anything or heard any strange sounds. I tried to answer as honestly as possible, but I lied about seeing a shadow hanging from one of the platform's columns. I knew that if I gave him the impression I was hallucinating, they'd send me ashore immediately. I explained that I went down to investigate a strange noise. I found the source, but a wave made me stagger, and almost falling into the frame triggered a panic attack. He understood my reasons. That night, I was able to go back to work. Although from then on, I always went with Robert, and the only way I could be alone on the outside was during the day. To this day, I still work on oil platforms, and although other strange things have happened to me, this is the only phenomenon I can't explain. I suppose I can partly accept that it was all a hallucination or that I saw things. Honestly, I don't think it was anything like that. That shadow, even though I only saw it for a very short time, was as real as the dangers of the ocean. I don't know if it was something related to that specific platform, or if there are beings in the sea that we don't yet know about. But without a doubt, that experience was a turning point for me when it comes to doing my job, especially when I'm on the night shift. My name is Liam, and I'm a crew member on a large fishing vessel. I'm from Jalisco, Mexico, but I immigrated to the United States a while ago, and life brought me to Washington State, to the small port city of Aberdeen. There, I started working in a shipyard, maintaining boats and barges. I made some friends, and after 2 years in that job, I had the opportunity to meet the man who, to this day, is the captain of the ship where I work. He's a great friend who has helped me in every way he could, and is also one of the most enigmatic people I know, Samuel Miller. Samuel Miller is a man in his 60s with a long gray beard, weathered skin, and strikingly deep blue eyes. He only needed a peg leg to be the spitting image of Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. He doesn't talk much, not even now, but when he does, he knows exactly what to say and when to say it. Anyway, thanks to my contacts at the shipyard and the persistence of some friends like Leroy and Isaac, who are also members of his crew, Captain Samuel was convinced that it was worth giving me a chance as a fisherman and accepted me onto his crew. Fortunately, the captain didn't mind too much that my immigration status wasn't ideal, and in fact, he would later help me obtain my documentation and improve my immigration situation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's return to what would be my first trip on the high seas. The idea was that this trip would be a trial run, so I could learn all the essential navigational skills for working on a fishing boat. The reality was that it was far more dangerous than I expected, especially where we were on the North Pacific coast. While they were explaining my job, the sea grew rough and rocked the boat, and if it weren't for Isaac's calm demeanor, I would hardly have remained so composed. In less than a day, I understood why the constant rocking of the boat was completely natural. And while I ate dinner in the mess hall, trying to keep my food on my plate, they continued explaining basic navigation techniques. I was adapting quite well, and I knew this could be a job I could get used to. And indeed, it was. But even today, I'm surprised that in that moment of relaxation in the kitchen, no one, neither my friends nor the other crew members I met, warned me about what I was about to hear that night when they turned off the lights. The cabins where we would sleep were cramped, and it made me laugh that next to each bed there were straps to tie you down so you wouldn't fall out when the waves were particularly rough. What they did warn me about was that sleeping was going to be a bit difficult, and indeed it was. That first night, I simply couldn't close an eye as the waves tossed me around in bed. I reckon it was 2 or maybe 3 in the morning when I heard it in the distance. A soft song with a gentle voice seemed to penetrate the wall next to my bunk. Suddenly feeling strange and confused, I pressed my ear to the wall. Besides the sound of the wind whistling outside, I could hear a serene song a little more clearly, which, despite being beautiful, gave me goosebumps. I tried to wake Isaac, who was sleeping below me, but there was no way to get her attention. I had to stay there in silence, listening to that song for the next 15 minutes until it fell silent. I spent the rest of the night turning the matter over and over in my mind until sunrise. I came to the conclusion that Captain Samuel had been listening to opera late into the night and that no one had told me because it was simply considered normal. Therefore, I didn't say anything about it the following morning. We had breakfast and started working almost immediately. I continued learning everything I could as quickly as possible, while Captain Samuel remained in the ship's bridge issuing orders periodically. The voyage would last about 3 weeks, and although I was exhausted, on the second day the ship's rocking prevented me from sleeping soundly. Around 2 a.m., a loud wave that shook the ship woke me up, and although everyone else was still snoring in the cabin, my sleep was completely shattered, and I heard her again. For the second night in a row, her melodious voice pierced the wall and made me tremble with fear. Again, I thought it was the captain listening to opera or something, but something inside me, perhaps instinct or perhaps common sense, told me something was wrong with those nightly chants. To be honest, it didn't make sense for the captain to play music so loud in the middle of the night, even if he were awake. My heart raced knowing there was something unknown behind those walls, moving about the ship's deck as if nothing were amiss, singing softly and melodiously, as if the ship weren't rocking from the force of the waves. This nightly episode repeated itself every night, and on Friday, 5 days into the voyage, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. I approached the captain while we were cleaning the deck, and, in the friendliest and most joking tone I could muster, said, "Wow, the waves in Captain Samuel's opera sessions haven't let me sleep at all." I waited a few seconds to see his reaction. The captain simply pretended not to hear me for a while. I didn't dare bring up the subject again until, an hour later, he whispered to me, "Dude, if you heard her, just ignore it. Nothing bad will happen to you." I stared at him, wide-eyed, not quite understanding what he meant. And when I mentioned it to Isaac, he wasn't exactly clear about it either. He told me that everyone there was used to it, and that I'd gradually be able to sleep without any problem, that it was a good ship and that nothing bad had happened to them. I didn't understand what they were talking about, or rather, I didn't want to understand, since deep down I realized that it definitely wasn't Captain Samuel's radio broadcasting those songs at night. In a way, my friends were right, and after a few more days, I got used to both the songs and the violent waves of the North Pacific. But that feeling of uncertainty and mystery gnawed at me in the mornings when we woke up. There were no women on our crew, so I couldn't even attribute it to some kind of joke or hazing they were trying to play on me. It was simply inexplicable, and it remained so for 2 weeks of the voyage. We fished for salmon until the hold was full, and then we started the return trip. I was happy. My first voyage had been a success, and I felt comfortable with the crew, the captain, and the ship. One ordinary night, when the sea was calm for a change, I needed to urinate. I went to the bathroom, and while I was there, rocking back and forth against the ship to keep my balance, I heard her in the distance, just like every night, without any straps holding me to the bunk and with my feet firmly planted on the deck. Suddenly, a desire I couldn't control came over me. I took a deep breath and glanced around the cabin. Everyone was asleep except me. No one was going to stop me, so I headed for the galley. I walked past the cupboards. I put a thick coat over my nightclothes, as it was bitterly cold outside, and went out onto the deck, listening the whole time to the soft, melodious singing of that bird. Captain Samuel's ship, to give you an idea, is what's known in the fishing industry as a factory ship, designed to process and freeze fish as soon as they're caught. It's about 70 meters long, and the crew on that trip numbered roughly 40. When I went out the door onto the deck, I expected to see someone, any member of the crew, singing amidst the sea while they worked. But to my surprise, there was no one there. Just a large area of the ship with cranes, rigging, and the cold, salty breeze whistling through the metal. As I said, the sea was very calm that night, and I, for some reason I still don't understand, felt calm. For the first time, that voice didn't frighten me so much. I ventured onto the deck and began to walk around it, as if I were walking through my living room, silently following the singing that came from the stern of the ship. Only when I was halfway there, and the singing grew louder, did I realize the level of recklessness. I realized what I was doing, since I was on the deck of the ship at midnight, with no security or anyone who knew where I was. If a powerful, sudden wave were to throw me overboard, no one would notice in time to rescue me. I tried to run back, but a part of me begged me to reach the stern and find out who this mysterious singer was. I froze, afraid of being discovered, but my reckless side won out. I finished running to the stern of the ship, listening as the noise grew louder. And when I rounded the corner, expecting to see someone singing by the railing, the singing stopped abruptly, and I could barely see a white mist disappearing to starboard. I quickly peered out, searching for the person hiding from my view, but I couldn't find them. My heart raced as I confirmed that this was supernatural, and terrified by that and the growing possibility of losing my newly acquired job, I rushed back to the cabins where Isaac was waiting for me, quite annoyed. Like a father, he scolded me severely for the next 15 minutes, telling me how dangerous it had been. After a long lecture, he explained the ship's rules again and why I shouldn't take risks like that. I explained that I was drawn to that ghostly singing. I suppose Isaac felt somewhat guilty since everyone on the ship heard it at night. He assured me that, far from being a bad omen, it was just another part of the job I had to accept. No one had been hurt by it before, and I had nothing to fear. Time has passed, and I've continued working on that fishing boat. I settled down and got married. Captain Samuel has been a great help, and on a couple of occasions, while we were sharing a beer after returning from a trip, he assured me that he made a good decision hiring me. In that atmosphere of trust, and despite any advice or recommendations from my friends not to mention the subject, I dared to ask the captain about those nighttime singing. Far from acting cold and aloof as I expected, he smiled in a way I can only interpret as nostalgic as he told me he was the soul of an old friend. Not a word more, and his silence made me understand that he had nothing more to say either. Today, I'm happy with that answer. I've grown more mature and less curious over the years, and it's enough for me to know that this ghost, far from being something malevolent, is simply the energy of someone who accompanies us on our journeys. Not everyone on the crew is so pleased with the ghost's presence, but there's one thing we all agree on. At least he sings very well.